Thank you all so much for joining us as we kick off season 4 of our Revise and Resubmit podcast.
Wow, season 4. Believe it or not, there are still many communication scholars out there for us to speak with. That's right, we are not done. Thank y'all for listening, and a happy 2022 to everyone.
As a reminder, I'm Dr. Kim Bissell, the Southern Progress Endowed Professor in Magazine Journalism and the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Communication and Information Sciences at the University of Alabama.
And I'm Dr. Annalisa Bowen, an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies, also at the University of Alabama, and we both work in the Institute for Communication and Information Research, or the ICIR, at UA.
So here we are in 2022. We are still navigating some of the pandemic-related challenges. Although I have to say, this podcast is way more enjoyable than our old newsletter, and it was the pandemic that got this podcast launched.
Absolutely, I agree. And we are excited to kick off season 4 today. Yes. We are continuing this season speaking with University of Alabama alum. And our first guest of the season graduated from the doctoral program in Communication and Information Sciences in 2017. And she is working still in the state of Alabama at Alabama State University. Dr. Kim Baker is with us today. And well, I never thought I would say this, but we are going to spend some time discussing the apocalypse. Well, yeah, okay. So here we are. We are going to spend some time discussing the apocalypse. But before we get into our conversation, I have to ask Kim, if you had to eat one food for the rest of your life, I mean, because isn't that what happens when the apocalypse happens?
I have to. Yeah.
I don't know. I have to do some brushing up with on apocalypsing. But anyway, if you had to eat one food for the rest of your life, what would that be? And if you had to watch one movie or TV series over and over and over again for the rest of your life, what would that be?
So for me, I'm going to have to go with something sweet like cake. I think cake covers many bases. And if we have varieties like carrot cake or chocolate cake or coconut cake, then definitely we've got it covered. Backup would probably be wine, because in an apocalypse, you definitely got to have wine.
Right.
TV shows, what am I going to watch over and over and over again? I think I have to go with The West Wing, but I have to know, what about you?
I mean, good choices. And for me, I'm hopping on that cake bandwagon and I'm watching Housewives. And don't limit me to one franchise. I want all of the Housewives to watch over and over and over again alongside with the cake. All right. Enough. I mean, first of all, we've got to go figure out what even an apocalypse is, because I think we have a rosy idea of what it
Absolutely.
What our apocalypsing might be with cake and wine and TV. But our doomsday glass is half full. But anyway, let's get into our conversation with Dr. Kim Baker, an associate professor of journalism at Alabama State University.
Welcome, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to be able to catch up with you.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So, Kim, we are recording this conversation at the start of the spring 2022 semester. And like so many other institutions around us, we find ourselves still in the middle of a pandemic with uncertainties and unknowns and all of the things. So how are things holding up for you at Alabama State University? And are you kind of finding yourself in the same little what's going on every single day?
Well, I will say there have been challenges from, are we going to be virtual only, to are we going to be a mix of, hybrid type courses, and are we going to be able to do events or not, or have guest speakers? So just challenges, but with challenges come good things, because just like this podcast, you find different ways of reaching out to people, and sometimes they may end up being better ways than what you had originally been doing. So I guess like everybody, just adapting and trying to do the best we can.
I love the optimism.
I really appreciate that. So it's not it's not even half full. It's like overflowing.
Well, we have our days too. Hair pulling and can't see the students in person to advise, and you're having to go back and forth virtually. So there are a few challenges, but hey, it is what it is. We're all
Yes.
still here and that kind of thing. So,
Yep. All right. So, Kim, we're going to transition into a quick little rapid fire section. So our guests, our listeners can find out a little bit more about you, our guest. So first, where are you from?
well, I live in Lake Martin area. For those who are familiar with Alabama, which is sort of in the middle of Alabama. Honestly, it's less than an hour from Auburn,
Oh.
so don't hold that against me. Um, and Alabama State University is in the capital, Montgomery, Alabama, where I teach and work.
And when were you at the University of Alabama?
Well, I actually was a student here back in the Stone Age, and ended up going to Auburn and get my master's, and then getting my PhD from Alabama. So you can kind of say I'm well rounded on my colors in my closet, from gold and black to yes, don't hold against me, orange and blue, and then the crimson and white. So
We
And
won't how much of each of those colors are.
so we are very curious to know, what did the young Dr. Kim Baker think she would be doing when she grew up?
I don't think I ever thought teaching. I'll be honest on that one. I probably always thought I would be sort of the Pied Piper of all homeless animals, and I would have this massive sanctuary and just take care of any animal that need to be taken care of. And then, of course, you grow up in reality of money. But I did always, when I was little, would line my little stuffed animals up and teach them, or really just be bossy to them. So maybe they're back in the back of my mind. Maybe I always thought I could teach, but ironically, when I was undergrad, I waited till my senior year to take public speaking because I dreaded it so much, and then ended up getting a teaching assistantship at Auburn. And that's when I discovered that, hey, I'm actually decent at this.
Nice.
So landing in academia was a shock if you kind of reflect back on it?
Probably so. I just did not, it just not was in my wheelhouse, because actually I'm not a traditional student, in that I worked before I came back to or went to college. So all my background and working was in marketing, and it just wasn't on my radar until actually somebody mentioned it to me, the program they were going into, and I was like, that sounds interesting. And lo and behold, there that door opened, and I went right through it.
Hmm. Did you go right from a master's program right into a PhD program?
No, of course, I have to do everything sort of backward, and I have to take the scenic route a lot of times. So I actually got my master's and immediately came back to Alabama State University because there was an opening, and started teaching. And then there was a 10-year gap before I went to the PhD program. So, yes, I was old when I was at UA. So, not the traditional route, but hey, it worked for me. So,
But I think that's the beauty of having these conversations. It's really important for listeners to hear that the path isn't always linear. All the guests that we've spoken to over the course of 3 seasons now, everyone's path has been a little bit different. And I think it's kind of reassuring to know that you don't have to know when you're 18 or 20 or even 25 that this is what you're going to do. So it's important to hear those stories.
right.
That's
I agree.
So, Kim, let's get into some of your scholarship. Can you give us an elevator pitch on your research and your scholarship?
Well, normally my elevator pitch, it would take me so long to even just think about which research I would even want to pitch that it would be over with. But and I was very fortunate when I was at UA to work with a wonderful group of people, and it was a team, and we put out a lot of research, or did a lot of research together, and it was varied because our interest was varied. So I think I've always enjoyed just learning things and exploring things. So it has been a little varied, but I'll say probably the most interesting one that would grab somebody's attention just happened by circumstance that I was in a class at UA with Dr. Bagley, and I did it for class, a research project on The Walking Dead. So, which is
Wow.
quite, yes. So I would say my elevator pitch for that one, because it's kind of interesting and everybody's sort of familiar with it, would go along the lines of something. Hey, have you ever thought about if you were in apocalypse, how you would survive? Well, let me tell you how The Walking Dead, analyzing it, can help you out. First of all, you need to surround yourself with very knowledgeable people, people who know things such as engineering and how to grow things, and how, if you have a broken leg, those type of things. But nowhere in that are any of the isms. There's no consideration, if you're just trying to survive until you can thrive, on race or gender or age. It's people who can help you live. So The Walking Dead can tell us very quickly that those prejudices we have drop by the wayside when you're just trying to survive.
I now
So
feel like I need to go binge watch The Walking Dead after I've seen it.
oh, we got to think back when I did this. It rivaled sports, which is one of the only shows that had ever done that had numbers that were live numbers, like sports was, like Sunday night football and Monday night football. So anyway, at the time it was sort of interesting.
I know. I feel like I need to go find some.
Well, interesting enough, that little class paper ended up as a chapter in a book.
Oh,
Oh, that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, with Dr. Lynn. It was in one of her books about race and gender. Um, so anyway, that would be my elevator pitch for one that people would probably remember, at least The Walking Dead, if they didn't watch it.
So, to take it a step further, if you had to come up with a headline for one of your more interesting findings, what would that headline be?
Well, once again, I have so varied research. So let me put you on the spot. Let me
Oh
give
boy.
you a few headlines, and you tell me which one you think is most interesting.
The journalism professor says.
Yes. And let me see if you can guess what in the world they're about. So let me give you 4 quick ones. Oh, say, what do you see as an American?
Ooh.
That's one of them. Okay. Don't have a clue? By all means, share your opinion. Uh, the third one, music matters when persuading, or wait, is it really humor? And the last one, health trackers, the great motivators, or are they?
Oh my goodness. Okay. This is going to be a tough one to choose. I do actually want, I'm going to now have 2 follow-up questions, because I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about don't have a clue, by all means, share your opinion.
Okay.
Tell us about that study.
I'll try to condense this down very quickly, because this was part of my dissertation, although it was not the focus of my dissertation. It just emerged as an interesting, what about that kind of thing for my dissertation. And so my dissertation looked at knowledge and what forms our knowledge. And I was looking literally at a model I had created to say that beliefs are not just beliefs, they actually form what we consider our fact base. So just a quick example, like you can hear the term ocean temperatures are rising, or increasing, but if you hear the term global warming, that's sort of a belief, whether or not what you attribute that to. So anyway, in my dissertation, one little finding was, when you're looking at people and how they use social media to gain their knowledge through news stories, that the people with the least knowledge, that have really no clue about the news, are the ones that will put an opinion up and share it more than any other. Does that surprise anyone in hindsight? No. So that was that one.
I, you know, I, I'm very well. Okay, so honest talk. I'm very quick to judge when I see misinformation, and I'm like, oh, you don't know, this is wrong, blah blah blah. But now I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, am I ever like sharing my own what I think is fact? Now I'm like it because I'll be really confident about that. And now I'm like, ooh, do I what
Well, you're so right. And part of it was, I mean, that's kind of a funny thing, but some of it was sort of important because things such as breast cancer,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, they had the option to, this is even more interesting. They had the option to either say, I definitely know this is accurate or not, or I don't know. So
mhm,
they literally could say, you know what, I'm not sure about that. But unfortunately, people chose, yes, I know this for a fact. This is absolutely true when they really had no clue. So, breast cancer, people, a lot of people, a huge percentage of people think it's the number one killer of females.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not,
mm,
or it isn't. So, that's just one example. So, 70 something percent of people chose breast cancer as the number one killer when they had the option to say, you know what, I'm not really sure about that. Yes. So that was sort of, and so that tied into those people were more likely to share the information and share it incorrectly.
well, and you know what? This is also going to have a lot of implications for the interviews that I do for my squad for the apocalypse now.
And I will say, just while we're talking about that one, for those of you who might be interested in going to grad school and getting on a research team, that you're you're not there because you're the most knowledgeable. You're there because you have promise
Mhm.
and somebody saw potential in you. So your task is to be confident enough or secure enough to recognize that you need to go pick the smartest people in the room and attach yourself to those people if they're willing to share that knowledge with you. And just recognize the fact you really have no clue as to what you're doing yet, and find people who are willing to support you and help you get there. So that's my little tie into the apocalypse. So somebody can have knowledge, but if they're not willing to share it, it doesn't help. So when you go to grad school, pick those people. And I did a wonderful job picking my people.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I do want to follow up on one of your other headlines about health trackers, because I feel like when you were working on this study, it was a couple of years ago, but my, how things have changed with health trackers now.
I
And
know it.
so, what I'm wondering is if you think about what you found from that study, and then just, I guess, more practically, or thinking about things now, would you say that they are used more as motivators, less as motivators? How have things changed since you worked on that project?
That is such a good question because now you're making me think about it.
As
Okay,
we
this may
all
be
look
another
down at our
research
fitness
direction.
watch.
I'll have to give you credit on that one. I have to put you as co-author on that one. Well, when I first looked into health trackers, it was really kind of a personal interest because I was using it, and this was back in the day when it basically just counted your steps and the sleep. We're just starting to get into it, because this was what, 5 or 6 years ago when it first started, and I found that, and this really kind of ties into how I personally use it too, that they can be great motivators, especially getting people to start. Oh, I got this new little gadget, it's going to help me out. But we found that if people can't meet their goal, say your goal is to walk 10,000 steps today, if you can't meet it, it becomes discouraging. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're sort of apt to not even want to look at it because you can't meet your goals.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little disheartening, but it's actually, it backs up how I feel. If I look down and I see, oh, I've only got 6,300 steps and there's no way I'm going to get them today, it really is discouraging. So I think if I were to approach fitness trackers today, if I did a research project, I would want to look at how they've changed, because I think the ones that probably are successful, and I would want to research this to see, are the ones where you're actually doing something with the information. For example, after all that, with the little wristband thing on my phone, I have fitness trackers that donate to charities whenever I hike. So
What?
if I go out, right.
Wow.
Yeah, there's one called Walk for a Dog. I think it has some other name too on the App Store. But you can go on it, and every time you walk, you start it, and they don't really keep up their mileage or anything. But every time you walk, it donates a little small percent to your humane shelter of choice.
What?
So that's a huge motivator for me, because I'll be like, okay, I got 30 minutes. Hey, here, let me hit that thing and take a quick hike or whatever. And you can even upload your little doggy photos so that
Oh
you
my
can walk with your
goodness.
doggy. Yeah. So I think things such as that, where you're actually doing it for a purpose beyond just your own little fitness goals, I think those are probably big motivators. And things like when I travel and I find a new trail, somebody's already on there and has put information, and like you can go on to the apps and, oh, if I walk a mile, I'll get to see a waterfall. Or if I walk another mile, I'll get to, see this landmark or something like that. So I think just the social aspects now of it probably are bigger motivators than just the act of tracking.
So first, I mean, after I interview my apocalypse squad,
Because cardio is important.
yeah,
That's right.
I
That's
gotta
right.
download this app. But I'm also wondering, just with, I think health trackers are so interesting because as a non-competitive with other people person, I am like a little bit competitive with myself. And
Hmm.
so like I can be in pain, like sore muscles or tight muscles, but I'm like, oh my gosh, that that stupid fitness tracker, I've got 13 steps, take
Yes.
15,122 steps, and I'm going to do it because that's what it says. And
Right.
it's
Mm-hmm.
not even like motivating to be like healthy because I should take a break. But
Right. I understand completely. And that was really kind of what the research backed up. And that was the reason why, say, for example, you were sick, or you just, for whatever reason, you couldn't accomplish those goals. It was very discouraging,
Mhm.
because it makes you not even want to look at it. I don't even want to look at it. I don't, if I can't reach my goal, then I don't want to know how badly I did, kind of thing. So,
Right.
but I'm definitely with you on that one, because when I hike and stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I just walk, another 10 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
I'll be faster than I was last time. So, yes, I think they can be great motivators.
So Kim, you've talked about like some help communication. You've talked about like analyzing a TV show. How did you get started doing all of the different research that you do?
Oh my gosh. Okay, my research, the people that supported me when I was in grad school and stuff probably beat their head against the walls with me, because I was one of these people that, it's like, look, Kim, you have to pick something. You cannot have 100 things that you want to do. So I've always been one of these, and I think it's because I was in the practical world before I went to research, that you always research for a reason, to fix a problem. So the idea that you can just sort of research something you're interested in was just so alien to me,
Mm-hmm.
that it was wonderful, because I worked in a team that everyone had different interests. So I got to dabble in a good bit of stuff. But my sort of research, once I started doing it, I kind of focused more on knowledge and how we have knowledge, what we do with knowledge, and just trying to figure out why in the world how you can have a group of people with the same facts, but yet they believe something so differently. I mean, just look at our society now.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to make sense of that. how can we exist and experience the same thing but view it so differently, and our knowledge base come out of there so differently.
Hmm.
So I have a question, and it's going to kind of shift our. We know that you're a professor at Alabama State University. Can you tell us a little bit about the classes that you teach? Since you've studied so many different things, do your students get to learn about some of this research that you've done? And then do you also share with them, sorry, it's a long three-part question. Do you also kind of share with them, all these little nuggets of information that you've shared with us today about surrounding yourselves with the smart people and how to build your squad and things like that?
Yes, my students probably are like, oh, here she goes again, talking about, oh, while I was at UA, we did this research project. Yes, they do hear it, but I would say they probably incorporate that into their everyday lives. I try to make it relevant to them because ASU is a traditional sort of college in that most of our students come here right out of high school. And, I am old. I have to find ways to sort of relate to them. So I try to keep up with things that they're doing and that type of thing. And I've forgotten the three-part question here. Oh, what type of things do I incorporate into the classroom?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I try to take my research. For example, I did some research on visual literacy, and this was an eye opener because the university I teach at is a historically Black college. So not only are my students mainly younger, but they also are a different race than I am, typically about 90%. So this shows how people can think you're aware of your biases and how you were raised and things like that culturally, but they still creep up. So a researcher and I, who's about the same age as I am, wanted to do a visual literacy instrument that tested cultural things related to America. So basically, if somebody came here and said, "Oh, what visual things would you say or epitomize America?"
Mm.
That you would have 100 images that show what it means to be American. So we didn't even get started before we were like, oh, this is a rabbit hole. Because who's smart enough to determine what those 100 items are? So
Mm.
we had to divvy them up into categories like art, monuments, those kind of things. And so when we started, we did this, we were sampling. And so we gave an example and we said, well, let's pick somebody in pop culture that most people would know that's kind of the epitome of American. We picked John Wayne.
Hmm.
Now this was 15 years ago, so he was still sort of not. So can y'all sort of detect my problem here? But
Mhm.
this was the sample. It was just like, please identify this person. We thought, the majority of Americans would know this. Do you know that our students, the majority of them said he was Ronald Reagan?
Mm.
Wow.
So that sample little question that was just intended to show you how the instrument worked
Mhm.
showed us that we had a long way to go before we could determine what images would be American, because we have to recognize that America is a huge melting pot. It really is. And race and age and the region where you live, all of those things matter. But we finally did, over several years and getting input from people and things like that, did do 100 image instrument. And sadly enough, things such that you would think would be common, things people would agree on: the Capitol, the White House, who's on Mount Rushmore. We don't do a very good job of knowing those.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So, yeah, even people on money, which you think would people would know,
Mhm.
dollar bills and stuff. No, we don't do a very good job of identifying those things. People do know who Mickey Mouse is, though. You know, priorities.
Cultural icon right there.
Cultural icons were the highest ranked ones, but you would be surprised at how many difficulties we had even on those. Older people have no idea, for example, who like Gwen Stefani is, or younger people would have no idea who maybe, somebody, even now, somebody like Prince or Michael Jackson, another 10 years, people may not know who that person is, or be able to identify what the person looks like.
So I have a question related to your process here, rather than the outcome, and that is you've identified something you want to study, and then you start getting into it, and then you realize that, oh my gosh, there's so much more here. And then, like, how do you, or do you stay focused on that, like, initial research question, or do you allow yourself to, like, chase those rabbits?
Yeah, I can easily get sidetracked on things. So this is where my little team comes into play, because I really do find people who are smarter than I am and say, help me out here, please. I got like 20 directions here, and help me make sense of this. So I really just don't understand how people can do research in a bubble, like as like lone little silo, because that project it started off with some researchers I was working with. We're just doing it as a visual literacy instrument for art.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were an art student, what images of American painters and such would you need to know to be considered literate in art? And that's where we just thought, oh, well, let's just do one for Americans, like and it was based on words, 10,000 words you should know, if you're sort of literate. And it came to the point where we literally went to um, conferences and things like that, and spoke to people in the audience and things that said, okay, here's our dilemma. Who determines what it means to be American? What, like, do we have to have a representative from every group, or is this a moot cause, or is there a way to say that there are at least these images that the literate American person should know? So it was a process of years, and we determined that the instrument needs to be revisited about every 5 years to keep it a living instrument that can actually be used for a purpose. So I think it's just getting feedback from others who have experienced similar issues and that type of thing that help you become a better researcher.
That's a very good answer. I
Yeah.
think that's totally, I totally agree with that. So we're going to shift gears on you again. We do that a lot in this podcast. Always shifting gears. When we think about the future of the discipline, so broad, but when we think about the future of the discipline, what is something that you're excited about, or something that you're looking forward to, whether it's a new class that you're teaching, or a project that you're working on, or anything else? Because I feel like we're kind of at that point where, clinging on to that earlier optimism and hope that you had, we need to go back to that optimism and hope. What are you excited about?
Oh my gosh! No, really do have to shift gears, because I'm sitting here thinking about news and stuff, and how it's almost okay. I teach it, but do I even really want to listen to it anymore? Um, I would say probably the most exciting things are ways that research can help people. For example, just or help cover news more effectively and accurately. Um, and as far as maybe health comm and those type of areas, yeah, I'm really being broad here because I'm trying to cover everything, is sort of how these, even like this podcast, for people who are elderly or shutting, almost anyone now has access to some technology, that those things can help people reach out to one another and stay connected. And even you can probably guess, since how I started this show talking about animals, heavily involved in humane shelters and things like that. And, now the technology and being able to share through social media, these things such as when an animal's lost, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, my pet just got lost. You can find that pet in usually hours because people are willing to share. And so all these interests we have and these ways that we connect as people, we can figure out better ways of doing them and to help one another. Of course, there's the negative side of it, but you asked me to be positive. So we'll forget about those people that are sharing that don't really know what they're talking about.
Right, right.
But we'll focus on the positive that I think for people struggling like with PTSD or struggling because they're elderly and their family maybe is not around them, that there's ways for people to use our social media and things to stay connected with the world and be relevant to each other.
Mm. Yeah, I'm thinking like maybe we need to go to one of those like frameworks of if you share one negative thing, you have to share 5 positive.
Or maybe for every negative, you have to donate like so
Yeah,
much to
right,
your
right.
favorite charity or something, kind of like the curse jar,
Yep,
back in the
yep,
day when you said a curse word. Okay, if you're going to share something negative, there goes that dollar over
yep.
to
Yeah.
the charity.
See, that's a good research study that we need to I can
Well,
see it taking shape right now.
there we go. Yeah, let's chat afterwards. Let's get this going. Let's go down that rabbit hole.
Exactly. So, Kim, to wrap it up, one final question, and that is, what academic conference are you looking forward to attending in the future, or what is one of your favorite conferences to attend or present at?
I would say I enjoy all of them, and especially the international ones, such as the International Communication Association. However, I think my favorite one is the Broadcast Education Association conference in Vegas every year in
Mm,
April because it really does showcase research, but it also has so much sort of hands-on, practical, exciting atmosphere. Not just because it's in Vegas, but just because it's tied to the NBA or NAB conference to National Association of Broadcasters. So, I think as a student, that one really excited me the most, and they're very receptive to student work and
mm,
displaying it. And you get the mix of research, but you also get the mix of people who are creating shows or podcasts or things like that they're doing the new thing, so you get to see what's new that does spark ideas about research.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just that one's probably the most exciting.
in Vegas, I mean, how great are
Vegas,
Right.
yeah, go hike the Grand Canyon or the Red
yeah.
Hills, yeah. So
Well, Kim, I just want to say thank you for making the time in your day to chat and to catch up with us on this podcast. And I would just be remiss if I did not make this last little statement. I think one of the coolest things about being in academia is that it's a small world, but it can also be kind of a bigger world. And when you were at the University of Alabama, you were one of my students. I totally enjoyed that relationship with you and working on the research. And then just kind of randomly last fall, when I was looking for students to join a class, and I'm teaching this spring, MC 595, which is international storytelling, this wonderful student reaches out to me, expresses her interest, and as I hopped on Zoom with her, and we get into this conversation, and she starts talking about her time at Alabama State University and this wonderful professor she has. And I'm like, I know where you're going with this. I totally know where you're going with this. And it was just so cool for it to come back kind of, full circle in that way, because it's like, I had the great pleasure of, and honor of getting to work with you in a classroom setting, and now I'm going to get one of your great
Mm.
students. So it's like, yay! So
yes,
just wanted to mention that.
well, and that's where I say surround yourself with smart people, because when I came to UA, who was the first person I approached? It was you. So, and both of you were instrumental to my success at UA. And when, and I fully loved my time there and loved my experiences with all of you as a team, and can't thank you enough for everything you did for me. But yes, I'm so glad that my student is now there
Yes.
with you. Yes.
Well, thank you
Very
so
cool.
much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
It was so great to have you tune in with us for episode 1 of season 4 of Revise and Resubmit. I truly cannot believe we are in season 4 already. We had a great conversation with Dr. Kim Baker, who's at Alabama State University, and these conversations with our PhD alum will continue next week. Gotta mark your calendars for this if you haven't already. We're going to be checking in with Dr. Dylan McLemore, who is a journalism professor and public relations professor at Central Arkansas University. There's so much to talk about here. He has so many stories to tell about being in broadcasting, doing kind of little dabbles into radio and TV and sports, but we talk politics and Twitter. Definitely don't want to miss it. Tune in next week, every Monday at 11 a.m. when the new episodes drop.